Thank you for your gifts, and we will endeavor to use them wisely. And now, Reverend Charlie.
I just want to begin by thanking Judy and the choir just for the music today. I mean, the music of Scott Joplin, who just revolutionized American music, an African-American piano composer at the turn of the 20th century. And that song, Hush. Hush, somebody's calling my name. The idea in that probably has its roots in the gospel tradition, that somebody might be God. There's a verse in the Old Testament that says, "Be still and know that I am God." But I also think that there are people who are calling our names all the time. There are people who have lived and died, and you don't hear their voice in a conventional way. But if you're still, if you hush, you can hear the voices of the ages. There are famous people, and there are people that only you know, that call your name and say something good needs to happen. You need to do something good. Medgar Evers was the field secretary of the NAACP in Mississippi, and he was shot down in his driveway on June 12, 1963. One of my favorite songwriters, Phil Oakes, wrote a song for him. Too many martyrs, too many dead. Too many lies and too many empty words were said. Too many times for too many angry men. Let it never be again. He recorded that song, but before he was able to put it out on the album, John Kennedy was killed. And so on his album after that album, he says, "The bullets of false revenge have struck us once again, as angry seas have struck upon the sand, and it seems as though the friendless world has lost itself a friend." That was the president, and that was the man. On the day of John F. Kennedy's death, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. released this statement: "I am shocked and grief-stricken at the tragic assassination of President Kennedy. He was a great and dedicated president. His death is a great loss to America and to the world. The finest tribute that the American people can pay to the late President Kennedy is to implement the progressive policies that he sought to initiate in foreign and domestic relations." The death was calling his name. And he said, asking people to listen and pay tribute by following those policies. King himself was assassinated 5 years later. Upon King's death, Robert Kennedy, the brother of John, spoke with empathy and anger he felt when his brother was killed. And he said these words: "What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion towards one another, and a feeling of justice to those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black." Kennedy concluded that we must work together to tame the savageness of man and to make gentle the life of this world. And then he was killed 2 months later. Folk singer Dion sang, "Anybody here see my old friend Bobby? Can you tell me where he's gone? Thought I saw him walking over the hill with Abraham, Martin, and John." Lincoln, the president, Martin Luther King Jr., the leader, and John F. Kennedy, the president. The response to martyrdom is usually a call to action. We must do something to carry on. Somehow there is a call to sanctify to death. There seems to be a need to move from brutality to spirituality. King talked about Jesus in his sermon, Strength to Love, said, "He knew that the old eye for eye philosophy would leave everybody blind. He did not seek to overcome evil with evil. He overcame evil with good. And though he was crucified by hate, he responded with aggressive love." King may be referring to Jesus forgiving people while he was on the cross, while he was being executed. But as a man of faith, he also believed in Jesus living after the resurrection, and so responding to the crucifixion with aggressive love. And so what does the Bible say about this Jesus after he's resurrected? Matthew 28 has the resurrected Jesus saying, "Go therefore and teach all nations, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you." Mark 16 says, "Go into the world and preach the good news to every creature." Luke continues his gospel in the book of Acts and has Jesus instructing the disciples to teach rather than the expected establishment of a political kingdom. But I like the story about the resurrected Jesus found in the book of John. And this was brought to my attention by Martin Luther King Sr. Well, he was visiting my campus, Alma College in Michigan, in 1980, 12 years after the death of his son. And the night before the service, or maybe 2 days before the service, the chaplain of the college called me in a panic because he had had a conversation like this with Martin Luther King Sr. He says, "Reverend King, we'd like to make the order of service. What do you plan to preach on?" Well, being an old Baptist preacher, said, "I'll just open up the Bible and preach." And he said, he says, "That's very nice. We still would like to have something in the order of service. We're Presbyterian after all, decent and in order. We'd like things to be a little bit precise." And he goes, "Well, you pick it." And he's, "You're a preacher too." And he goes, "I am not going to preach. Pick the top sermon that you're going to preach." And he said, obviously frustrated with the challenge, said, "Well, do that one about feed my sheep. You know that one." And I said, "Okay, yes." And then he started calling up everybody on the chapel committee going, "Okay." He said, "Do the verse, feed my sheep." I can't think for the life of me where that is. And so he had all his little minions looking through their Bibles trying to find, "Feed my sheep, feed my sheep." And it's in the book of John at the end. And so it says, when he had dined, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these?" He said to him, "Yea, Lord, thou knowest I love thee." And he said unto him, feed my lambs. And he said to him again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And he said, Yea, Lord, I know I love thee. And he said unto him, Feed my sheep. And he said unto him a third time, Simon, son of Joseph, lovest thou me? And Peter was grieved because he was being asked a third time, Lovest thou me? And he said, Lord, thou knowest all things, thou knowest I love thee. And Jesus said unto him, Feed my sheep. Now, Peter, in the gospel story, had previously denied Jesus 3 times, denied knowing Jesus 3 times after his crucifixion. So this story is done 3 times to kind of show that, yeah, Peter finally got it. And so he had that chance to proclaim his love 3 times. But in response to that love, Jesus didn't say, Thank you, I'm glad you like me. He gave a command. The command was not worship Jesus, but feed his sheep. The true response to martyrdom is not to worship the martyr. And that gets kind of tricky during the King holiday. You know, we hear the I had a dream speech year after year after year, and it seldom goes any deeper than that. And people think that Martin Luther King was revered during his lifetime, and he was not. Both white and black people alike thought he was moving too fast, stirring things up too much. And this nonviolent thing went against the whole character of the United States. Because what he was doing when he was killed, he was marching with garbage men and preaching against the war, saying we need to divert money from the war in Vietnam to help the working poor. And this made him more dangerous to the status quo than his civil rights work. In his sermon, Beyond Vietnam, he said, a nation that year after year continues to spend more money on military defense programs than programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. King saw the deaths of American and Vietnamese people as a call to action. In his moments of silence, he hushed, and the dead were calling his name. And he called for change. John Kerry, upon returning from Vietnam in 1971, asked the Senate, how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake? We in America seem to relish sending people to war. Our whole history has this sheen of war. The Revolutionary War made us free. But I look and I don't see us being all that more free than Canada, who didn't go to war. And we have the whole war against the Native Americans. But the war in Iraq had between 100,000 and 600,000 deaths. Even the lowest estimates are far too many people dying for the lie of weapons of mass destruction. And there are rumblings of continuing or restarting that war now. The war in Afghanistan has continued since 2001. Much has been lost and little has been won. How do we honor all that have died? And then we also need to remember that each person we kill is a potential martyr for the other side, inspiring their resistance. soldiers and peace activists like King enter their profession fully aware that they may be killed. In some ways, they are courting martyrdom by putting their lives on the line. Some carry a gun and some do not, but they know that where they're going, trying to make a positive change, that they may die. But there are even more people who die without warning, not while they're in the midst of action, not with the expectation to die. The people in the Twin Towers and on the planes on 9/11, the hundreds of students shot down at school each year, victims of domestic violence, and victims of lynching. After the Civil War, there were constitutional amendments that were passed that gave rights to African Americans. And the response to this was terrorism. A terrorism that was used to keep black populations in check. Lynching is the mob killing of innocent people or accused people who have had the right to a trial interrupted. The Equal Justice Initiative documents over 4,400 lynchings across the United States, 2 of them in Craven County. John Moore in 1905 and Percy Berry in 1932. How many of you know or remember somebody who was alive in 1902 or 1905 or 1932? Your parent, yourself, your grandparent. This is not that long ago. Members of our Social Justice Committee are meeting with the African American Historical Society, Tryon Palace, and the Bank of the Arts. And we're working with the Equal Justice Initiative to call the community to hush and listen and see if these deaths call our name. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice opened in Montgomery, Alabama on April 26, 2018. It's the first memorial dedicated to the legacy of enslaved black people and people terrorized by lynching. It's in Montgomery, Alabama, but they want people to bring awareness wherever this injustice has occurred. It's in Montgomery, Alabama, where James Reeb and Viola Luiso, Unitarian Universalists, were killed and working on the marches. This project was the outgrowth of the primary work of the Equal Justice Initiative. EJI is committed to ending mass incarceration. Because one of the things that the NAACP did as they were growing in the early 20th century, they would hang a flag outside their offices and say, "A man was lynched today," to remind people that this injustice has to stop. And laws were written in the early 20th century that forbid lynching and crack down on it. But the response was then the war on drugs and getting tough on crime, which then resulted in mass incarcerations of mostly people of color. And this mass incarceration had people on death row that were innocent. 1989, Brian Stevenson founded the Equal Justice Initiative, and his story Just Mercy is a book, and it's currently in the movie theaters. It was number 5 at the box office last week. The number 1 film in the nation at this time is 1917, and that's about war, and it might also have lessons in martyrdom. But I remember World War I was said to be the war to end all wars, and I know it did not. Perhaps King's nonviolent method might still be worth a try. But what we need in this country is a martyrdom prevention program. People shouldn't have to die just because they want to emigrate into this country. They shouldn't be forced to try to get across deserts because all the traditional doors are closed. And recently, a Unitarian Universalist won a court case because he was being taken to jail for leaving bottles of water in the desert. And they tried to convict him. But he won the case of bringing peace and humanity to a deadly situation. The mass incarceration of children separated from their parents has resulted in several deaths. What do those deaths call us to do? How do we make a system so just that people aren't killed just for trying to be? Just for being. I return to Phil Oakes. There's too many martyrs and too many dead. Too many lies and too many empty words. Perhaps even this sermon is empty words. Because I hope that I listen to what I'm saying and do something. And I hope you listen to what I'm saying and do something. Jesus gave us the metaphor, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. How do we take care of the children? How do we allow enough room for them in their boisterousness? They're singing, they're laughing. Well, I saw some of you crying out there. Could you have these memories? We shall overcome. And I pointed out to one of them that someone's out there crying. And they quieted down. Because we have to teach them how important this is. And we have to embrace them in their flurry to say that they're important. And we want the world to be better for them. Feed our lambs. Create a nonviolent world and teach them to be nonviolent. To stand collectively against bullies. Not to live in fear, but to work boldly towards our highest ideals. To speak truth to power. And encourage that power to be shared by all. And perhaps adults can let themselves be taught by children. Especially these teens who are standing against violence and climate change. Response to martyrdom is to take action against the injustice that causes martyrdom. May those who have gone before us inspire us to be better. Please rise in body or spirit as you are able to join in singing hymn number 6.
In living our principles, I have a few things. We're looking for greeters for one Sunday a month. Please see Josie. Josie, where are you? Josie, okay. If you didn't already complete the safety survey, there's more of them out on the table over at this entrance, if you wouldn't mind filling one out and putting it in the box. If you are at all interested in contributing flowers, please see Jean Friend. Jean's in the back there. She would love to have you sign up. And lastly, hop on the bus. So we are working on the bus trip to Raleigh on February 8th. So if you're interested in hopping on that bus for HJ on K, please see Fred. Fred's over here. Our closing words today are from the poet Mary Oliver. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Ashe. Peace.